going with that and go back to this slide. So large problems need to be broken down into bite-sized pieces. And we stripped it down to just a few elements. There's a tiny bit of jargon that I'm going to try to get through very quickly so that you can see what the tools are, how they work, and how you can make them your own. So there are, the driver diagram. And if any of you actually have improvement science training or background, please know that you're going to be horrified with how stripped down this is, because it is, I wanted to get out of all the things that were about kind of being in love with the process and just what are the things that people need and can use to help support their work. So we've got it down to 3 very tightly conceived pieces. The first, they're called driver diagrams, but really they're root cause conversations. They're a way for a facilitator or a mentor to help teams or individuals dig deeper into the problems that you're trying to solve in order to really get to the core pieces, right? And then to think from those core pieces, those root causes, about the things that are and are not in your control, that are actions that you can take, things you need to do, things you want to do. Charters are just statements of purpose, right? What are we going to accomplish in some specified time frame? If we have a 2-year goal, what do we need to accomplish in a year to meet that 2-year goal? What do we need to accomplish in 6 months? What do we need to get done in the next 3 months? What's the next work we need to do? So it's about backing into the most important next work by thinking about and having a very clear understanding of what your longer term goal is. So I'll show you a template, an example of how to sort of structure that conversation. And then from those pieces, a short-term action plan is, and we structure them as 90-day plans or 120-day plans. I'll show you the 90-day one. I actually have found in the pandemic forced this, that you can really accordion those in and out in various ways, as long as you are practicing some of the key pieces of those check-ins on the thirds. Like if anything that you can break into thirds and require that you have those particular kinds of checkpoints, you can have them on longer and even shorter term timeframes. So they're designed to be flexible. And also because they are sort of modeled on the PDSA Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle of what do we want to do, how we're going to plan to do this thing, we're going to do this thing, how's it working, what are we going to do next, and how do we feed that back into a continuous cycle of actually thinking about our work as ongoing. Now, like I'm thinking particularly right now of remediation reform when I think about the way remediation reform and transfer reform are the places that we're using these kinds of cycles most often right now. And partly that's just because of, the work that we're passionate about and committed to, but also partly because things like, and I know that this will resonate with some of you, I've seen some nodding from Sean on this one before, that when it comes to things like COREC, you don't pilot, you don't want to pilot and then scale. I mean, Peter Adams' key insight about it took them 17 years to scale at Baltimore County Community College, and it could have taken them 3. And so it's a hard mindset shift to go to, no, you go scale and you improve, knowing that you're not going to get everything right out of the gate, knowing that you're going to have to make adjustments over time, but you don't set it up for failure by, picking at it in a pilot over here. You got to do it and improve. And so this kind of approach where improvement strategies are actually designed and the premise of them is aligned with that reality of that particular kind of innovation, I think makes them especially useful. People usually, you'll see like in checklists of things, like continuous improvement is always like listed at the end as, oh yeah, and then you do that. And this is like, no, actually you take a continuous improvement mindset and approach to the work as you're doing it to help you do it better, to accelerate the pace and improve the quality. So short-term action plans, really all they do is provide a structure of minimally rigid structure. So we keep them very light. So minimal rigid structure for learning, doing, and improving. They do give you a light project management ethos, and there's intentionality in them because they're clear, they're structured, and they're bite-sized essentially. And they provide light accountability for project teams. And I'll say more about that in a second, but they work best when they're kept tight and manageable and accessible with realistic charters. I have a lot, and I still have the experience of building 90-day plans for work and then finding pretty quickly that it was too ambitious. And that's okay. It's designed to be flexible so that you can scale it and right size it as you do it. But it really is about forcing early learning. And the idea is you learn fast, you fail early, and that is what helps you improve your quality of work. So there have been several, and I can give you concrete examples, but I won't go there now, several examples of 90-day cycles where we were testing something about, uptake of innovations in the classroom or something. And we had a theory in partnership with the, institution that we were working with that said, we think it's about this. And so we built a plan and we got into it. And within 2 weeks, we realized that the fundamental premise on which we were basing this was actually not quite right. We weren't looking at it right. Now, if we hadn't been on a short-term action plan, that could have gone on for 7 months without us realizing that we had a fundamental problem or that we were missing something. But because we were committed to these short increments, we failed we failed early on that, and something showed up as a red flag earlier than it might have otherwise. So couldn't be more simple. It's like, what are we going to do? Who's going to do it? How are we going to know that it's going to be successful? Like, how will we know when we've done it? When will you get each thing done, right? So it's very, very straightforward. They're also best if they're run iteratively with a couple of weeks in between to be like, oh, we learned this thing and we didn't hit our goal there, or we did hit our goal and we thought we would do this thing next, but now we know we need, right? So there's time between short-term improvement cycles to take stock, reset, revisit your driver diagram, revisit the conversation initially, and think about how to really build forward. Actually, let me go forward on this before. Let me show you this. This is a template for the other thing about the way that we approach driver diagram conversations or root cause conversations is you can do this on a Padlet, you can do this on a whiteboard, you can do this on a Google slide that's shared. You can sit at a table with a piece of paper and do this, because it's about taking a complex conversation and really drilling it down and distilling it into the root causes. And I will show you an example from transfer work of excellence that we saw in a cycle that we helped Miami-Dade, Florida International University and Miami-Dade College work on together around a transfer problem a specific transfer problem that they were having. So I'll show you that in a minute. But so this is what a driver diagram kind of template looks like if you were going to use this to frame conversations or to help a team that you're providing support to have a conversation. You could try this out. One of the strategies, I don't know if any of you have ever done a 5 whys exercise where I'm seeing some nodding, where you ask why, and you ask why again, you ask why again, and you get to the bottom of it, right? That can be a good facilitation strategy to accompany a driver diagram exercise. Because you can't have 10 drivers at the end of the day. And in fact, purists of improvement science would be horrified to see that I have 3. You're actually supposed to have 1. But that's not what this is like, because this is not about implementing hand washing in a surgical theater. This is about how sort of implementing really complex change that comes with a lot of uncertainty. So this is the template. Let me go back to and again, so for a facilitator, the questions on the side, on the right-hand side, are the ones that are helpful to you as a mentor. The things on the left are what you want to help them achieve with a driver diagram. So you want to help them delineate key challenges. You want to have that driver diagram serve essentially as a theory of action from which you can build a short-term action plan. You want to help translate institution's high-level goal into a logical set of underpinning activities or projects. So yesterday I was working with some states, some institutions in 4 states that are trying to implement 4 to 8 pathways specifically for adults of color returning to school with some credits and no credential. And so there's a very specific thing, but lots of different pathways within that. And what that high level goal looks like is, and on the overall aim, the highest level goal is they want to close attainment and equity gaps in opportunity and outcomes for their students. And they want to focus on adult populations. That's their overarching goal. Their SMART aim, the specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely goal, is that they want to have 4 to 8 pathways with full supports and grounded in anti-racist advising practices and aligned to workforce outcomes up and running by fall 2022. And so they need to think about, what are we going to be, what will we accomplish now in order to get there, right? And what are the big impediments between where we stand now and where we want to get? So what are the things, like this conversation on the right-hand side, what are the possible actions that can be taken? How is our commitment to equity showing up in our driver diagram? This sort of is a segue to the next part of the conversation here. But these are the kinds of questions that you would ask if you were facilitating. Again, here's the template that you can use, or you can make your own and come at this however you would like. Depending on your temperament and the temperament of those that you are helping, you can either come at the drivers as the enablers, as the keys to your success, or you can come at them as the barriers, the things that are persistently, pervasively preventing you from accomplishing what you want to accomplish. And so, depends on how you want to come at it. You can even come at it both ways if you have time or overtime working with institutions. Okay, so I want to show you a quick example of what excellence looks like. We were so excited about this cycle because these people had been working together. The enrollment manager at Miami-Dade or at FIU had been working closely with the provost and vice provost at Miami-Dade. They had been, they're trying to be good transfer partners to each other. They have a history of strong communication. They realized in the course of this work that what they thought was strong communication was actually the regular exchange of emails, and that's a different thing than strategic, strong, true channels of communication. And it was cool that they learned that in the process of taking on a short-term action plan. So the problem that they were trying to solve was their College of Business. So this is a quote from the enrollment manager there, that they had done an analysis of transfer applicants and showed that students were showing up they weren't completing prerequisites, but they were also showing up with excess credits. And they were, there were these weird hangups that were then showing up down the line and preventing those students from progressing thoroughly to their bachelor's degree. And the completion of prerequisites is critical, right, for progression in the upper level courses. And they also hadn't really touched a lot of those prerequisite challenges that the college had sort of created and placed for these transfer students. So they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. And it was only the first 4 things that they said that they were going to do. They were going to redesign a College of Business transition workshop for advisors. They were going to do a College of Business transition workshop for students. They were going to update all of their resources. They were going to design they were going to do these very discrete things, small, doable things. And this was the driver diagram that they came up with for that work. They wanted to dramatically improve outcomes for transfer students and eliminate equity gaps. They wanted to specifically reduce the number of students accumulating excess credits while not completing prereqs and high volume program. And as they had their conversation, the drivers that they came up with had to do with informational gaps. The second one here, so the top and the bottom are sort of technical things. There's information gaps because we don't have the right information out there. And the bottom was we have the wrong information. We have actually misalignment of resources and those students aren't getting the accurate information. So some is about insufficiency and some is about accuracy. But that middle one is about cultural inattention to viewing the work to be done through an equity lens that is focused on what is best for students. And that, I thought their shorthand on that conversation was sort of interesting because there was a lot to unpack there. But what was cool about their project is that they only decided to do okay, we have 3 months, what can we do? They wanted to do those 4 things on the possible actions on the right-hand side. But what they also did was the fifth one here. In the course of actually having the conversations, more strategic conversations than they had had before. And they said, we had regular exchange of emails. We feel like we know each other. We like each other. We trust each other. We want the same things. But we realized by working on this that we actually didn't have as strategic a relationship as we could. And as they started working on the informational pieces, they also identified that there was a prerequisite that could be met at Miami-Dade through a competency exam that FIU was not accepting because it wasn't something that was attached to a course, to a course. And it had been a pain point. It had been a source of hostile conversations between the institutions. There was just a lot, and it was, to hear the provost and the enrollment manager tell it, it was sort of a source of not only pain, but embarrassment on the part of both institutions trying to do this work, because it was clearly something that was screwing students over that they had not addressed in a long, and it had been going on at that point for years. And so some of the, I think as they came into this, they were like, well, that's kind of an impossible thing. That's a pain point. We can't, let's just like update our brochures and, make sure we have the right communication. But in the course of doing that, the right people were finally in the right conversations together about what that information was and what it meant. And it made that problem of that prereq, that competency prereq at Miami-Dade, it just rose it to the surface in a way that they realized they could actually address it. And so they took care of that. And it was an aside. I mean, it was not even part of what they were planning to do. And it was a major pain point for them and for their students. And when they solved that, when they were like, oh, well, actually, this is not an intractable problem. We just need these right four people in the conversation together to build that shared understanding to say, yes, we actually can accept the results of that competency exam as fulfilling the prereq for FIU. And so when they did that, they were so proud of themselves. I mean, they were so excited about what they had accomplished, and it made them hungry to keep. They were like, well, if we can do that and we can do these things, then let's start dealing with all the other things that are here for us. And it gave them a sense of capacity and possibility in the work. It was motivating for them. And so I'm going to pause in a minute and, invite you to, ask questions or share thoughts about this, but I just want to show you how simple a 90-day plan can look. It's like, what are you going to do? Who's going to be responsible for not getting it done, but shepherding, owning the communication around and shepherding that thing to completion, right? What are the implications? That's often communication implications that fall off. Like, who else is implicated in this that we haven't talked about, who isn't in this room right now? What are the risks? What are the things that threaten our ability to get this thing done? When are we going to do it? And what's its status, right? So it could not be more simple. What's really, really important, though, is that every single one of these columns gets filled out before a meeting ends if you're using it. You cannot leave if you don't have the owner and the due date category filled out, right? And in fact, we say it's a huge win, like, to not leave a meeting until you have your next meeting scheduled. If you can get all 3 touch points scheduled, ideally you touch in at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or any thirds will do. You can also kind of fudge it for calendars and schedules and whatnot. Just make sure you've got a regular touch point that you can do that is sort of relatively near, right, in time. So this is where, when you put the due date on, it's like the advice about if you want to incorporate exercise into your life, you don't say, I'm going to go and work out tomorrow. You say, I'm going to go work out tomorrow at 7 a.m. or 6 p.m. You set a time. Because when tomorrow comes and you decide that you want to sleep in or have a glass of wine instead of going to exercise, you actually have to make the decision twice not to do it, because you've put in your mind an actual intention of the time, right? So there's a kind of accountability that comes with, we're going to do this by here, not we're going to do this and see you at the next meeting, at which we'll show up together and be like, oh, that's right, I said I was going to do that. Let's go back. What was it that we talked about again? Which really saps morale and happens to all of us all the time in our meetings, right? Really good meetings, and then everybody leaves and they get sucked back into their rushing river, and then things don't actually move that could move forward. So that is how it works. These are as a facilitator or a mentor. If you're helping teams use 90-day plans, these are your questions. You know, are you clear? You know, you're asking them, are you clear specifically about what you're trying to accomplish and how it relates to your SMART goal? Are you really taking on the most important things that can be taken on? Because there's lots of stuff you can do. Are you doing the right things, right? To push that conversation and to say, this process calls for pushing that conversation. It gives you, the process gives you cover on asking hard questions of institutions that you're supporting. Whose input and support from other priorities is essential for your success. Have you captured that in the implication section of your short-term plan? Are you realistic in you know, what's entailed in making progress, barriers and strategies? What do you need from colleagues? What do you need from senior, like what do you need from other people, right? So facilitation tool there. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. How much time do we, I should have known this. How much time do we have in general, Jenny, here?
So we have another 30, no, Katie, am I right? Is it 30 minutes until we are supposed to be transitioning to the next part of the meeting?
Okay, got it. That's plenty of time. I just want to pause here because I'm talking at you all endlessly. Do you have questions about this? I'm going to give you the stuff after so you can kind of play with the tools yourself, but do you have questions about how you might use this or thoughts about what is and isn't resonating here in these tools and strategies? Or questions about how to use them?
The first thing I thought of is navigating institutional context that so for example, in my institutional context, a 90-day plan works as long as it's not something that needs to be approved by any certain standing committees, because then it turns into a 120-day process because it has to go to the meeting, be reviewed, come back for a vote. So it kills a lot of momentum.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I'm seeing the nodding here on that. I think you do not, yeah. So, I mean, this sort of reminds me of the environments in which we work, where there are really tightly organized collective bargaining structures through which formal decision-making happens, but it is significantly in practice impeding people from having the conversations that they actually want and need to be having about the work that needs to be done in several cases. So structure is really helpful in some ways, but it also is an impediment in other ways. And so thinking about how you have room to do the work that needs doing, acknowledging that these realities are here and how you account for them. So maybe, you know, there is some touch point, you know, maybe there is a through line across, you know, across 120 days of an approval process on something, but there's still the collaborative work that people need to be doing together in short-term increments to solve, you know, specific problems, right? And so, but it is a really good, it's a really good point to keep in mind. Other thoughts, questions, things that might make it easier or harder to help an institution use short-term action planning like that? There are a lot of, so I'm going to stop talking. I am unafraid of silence, so I will stop talking here. Oh yeah, go ahead, Sean, please.
So I feel you on the silence thing. I guess the other thing I thought of is that I do like the idea of setting sort of like concrete like deadlines for things that, like, even if it's just like, here are tasks that we're trying to complete, this is when we want them done by. I just think of my own context, like when we do things like discipline review and we would get like a very nebulous like due date, that my whole department would always push back to be like, you need to actually give us deadlines because we're all English professors and we will just do it the night before. So
yeah.
I need deadlines.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, having worked some with these improvement cycles in another project that we're working on with MCAN, what struck me was the value of how you could set even a really small thing, like, on the 30 days, like when we meet in 30 days, an email exchange will have occurred and people will have access to a software program that they didn't have access to before. I mean, like getting that granular with it ensures that it's done, so that you're not back at that meeting going, oh, I still don't have access to that database, so I can't do it. It's like, no, we set an intention and it's supposed to be done. And so, you build some accountability even for small things.
I think too, Jenny, that takes away the tendency by many, I mean, I would be included in that. Well, I can't do that because I don't know, you know what I mean? So like, great, well, let's remove that barrier. Let's identify it and remove it. And that's one of our action items. So I really appreciate that.
That's a great point. And that's sort of on the other end of the spectrum of one of the things that we also learned from the MCAN project, Jenny, that was really surprising is that, and another, I mean, I've learned this, not every mistake you just make once. Some of them you have to learn things by making the same mistake multiple times. But in 2 cases where I was sure that everybody was on the same page about the what of the work that we were trying to do, because they applied for the whatever, and they came to the introductory webinar and they heard that the goal was X, that somehow the 90-day, so we skipped the driver diagram conversation because we were like, oh, they already, basically their application to be a part of this thing is their driver diagram, they understand, right? But then as the plans came together for those things, it was like, well, this plan is not going to get you to that goal. And there was such a disconnect there that we realized that missed driver diagram conversation was really important, actually, and that they had not, in fact, they needed to have had that conversation, even though we thought that they already had it, essentially, because of what they said they wanted to be a part of, right? So that's one of the lessons learned. The great thing about these is that they're short term, they're low stakes. Overall, the work that you're trying to do is enormously high stakes, but these are not. So they are designed to accommodate, human foibles, basically, in this stuff, as well as get over those little things that, like the things that we do to bat away, and protect ourselves. Like, I would do that, but I don't have access to the whatever, and like on to the next topic. So it's a really, really good reminder, Lindsay. Okay. So I want to make sure, yeah, Sean, please go for it.
Oh, I was just going to also add that sometimes I like the idea of breaking this larger work up into these smaller bits, because I am the kind of person that I look at the big picture and then I anxiety shut down and I'm like, well, that's just too much. It's too much. I can't do it. But looking at those more digestible, actually true, actionable things that can happen to lead to the bigger thing, because I'm the kind of person that I won't do something for 3 months. And then when I finally do it, it only took 10 minutes. Yeah. So it's very much that kind of idea.
Resonating with me with the helping my daughter with the wedding planning. It's like, I just got off the phone with her 2 days ago. She said, so all I have to do after this call is send an email. I was like, yes, that's right. Send an email and then you're done for the day.
Jenny, you guys need a Padlet board. You need a wedding planning Padlet board.
That would be fun.
Yep. Go for it.
Okay, sorry, taking you off track.
No, that's great. That's exactly, I think the flip side of that, Sean, because I'm kind of the same cloth in that regard. The flip side of that is what we observe in the experience of the people who do the short-term action cycle, where they get excited about having actually accomplished something. Like my delight in my really minor technical victory yesterday is actually making my day better today, and imagine if it was actually relevant to really improving outcomes for students. Like, it brought me even more buoying, and so like the experience of having actually gotten something friggin' done is amazing, because there are a lot of people that I work with at institutions who are like, I couldn't tell you. I work 12, 13 hours a day. And if you asked me what I did today, I wouldn't be able to tell you. And, I get home from work and my partner asks me, what did you do today? And I feel like weeping, and I just hand over my phone and show them my schedule. And because the answer is, I'm not sure anything, I was in meetings all day. And so there's a lot of that I think some of these strategies can help cut through. Absolutely. Well, so Sam, this point is really important. Feel free to dig in here. You cannot do there's no value in doing a short-term action plan that is not first grounded in the big picture, because then it is not a short-term action plan. It's just a thing you're going to do in it has to align not only to the thing that you can measure, that's realistic, that you're going to accomplish in a year or 2 years, whatever, but it also has to align to what you're fundamentally trying to accomplish as your big goal. But Sam, feel free. Is there more you want to say on that one? Okay, got it. Okay, well, so that's actually a pretty good segue here to this piece. So the longer term goal, and again, this is, I'm just going to share SOVA's kind of point of view on this and direct you to OCCRL that has created a huge array of short video vignettes that are focused on equity grounded student success work. And they're lovely. They're between 5 and 20 minutes long. They come in clusters. They are great for individual self-reflection about the work. They're also good for like team building stuff. And you know how you did a mindfulness video at the outset here, which I love and wish more people would do. You can also use them to kick off a meeting if you want to kind of flip your conferences so that your meetings, so that you're not doing like keynote breakout, but like check out this or watch this thing before you come to this meeting. It's a 5-minute video. Like watch this and think about this before you come to this meeting. So I strongly recommend that you go and check out those resources. So the kind of grounding that this is our observation from work in various places, that equity is the new coconut water. Everybody talks about it. It's everywhere. And yet institutions, sorry, there's the use of the word reform there twice. Institutions are really actually struggling to walk that talk in various ways. And part of that is that there are these pervasive, so like for
Allison,
us being, yeah.
We're not seeing your screen.
Crap.
Now, I mean, you stopped, but now you're coming back. That's okay, no problem.
Okay, got it. All right, here we go. Sorry. Okay. So wait, did I miss anything? No, I think we're good. I think that's good. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So again, the equity talk is everywhere, but the actual work remains profoundly countercultural. And so for us, there are just a couple of things, and I'm sharing this with you as mentors, as not only for yourselves as you think about your colleagues in your work, but also just as you think about the challenges facing others in this work. So so on the right, when you get the deck, you'll have the link to the OCCRL resources on the right, and on the left are just a couple of things that are important to keep in mind. I see a small human. Hello, small human. I like that yellow. That looks cozy and wonderful. So even for access-oriented institutions, and I think this is one of the things that institutions struggle with being honest about, even for access-oriented institutions that were presumably created to fulfill our country's social contract about opportunity through education, regardless of accidents of birth or fortune, our structures, our systems, our institutions were actually built to sort people along race and class lines in our country. That is how they were created. The transfer problems that we see today are not the result of a broken system. It is the result of a system that was designed to maintain stratification along race and class lines. And it is something that we're not great at telling ourselves the truth about, because we also have these other narratives that make it easy to kind of bat that away. Because if you took that seriously, how would your work change? Not you, I mean institutional leaders, system leaders, policymakers, right? If you actually were to own that the structures are rigged, what would it require you to do in practice, right? And so there is actual intentionality at the heart of our stratified systems, and we are living in those as we seek to reform them from the inside. And it is important to just have that with you in mind. And, you know, again, this is our point of view. It's as the result of work with institutions, result of learning from folks like Dr. Ebony Zamani-Gallagher at OCCRL and others. But we think it's important for anybody that's supporting institutions in doing this work. So then there are a few other things that we think are probably really important for institutions to deal with that we see showing up in implicit and explicit ways, but it's hard. It's hard for institutions to deal with, and it's hard for people to acknowledge, but it's something that we think is worth putting words on. And, you know, it needs to be said and not go without saying that I am speaking this to you as a person who, as a white person who is navigating the world as a white person. And so thinking about things like the salience of whiteness and helping both myself and other white folks think about the salience of whiteness in the work is something that I feel needs to be a priority for me. And it's something that I want to help encourage as a priority for other white folks. And so that is where I am coming from on these, some of these pieces, including that one on the salience of whiteness. So these are for me, for us at SOVA, a few core concepts that it's just helpful to have yourself. And when we think about the importance of anchoring in purpose and grounding in purpose in the face of all kinds of implicit and explicit forces that conspire against us, having the conversations that are aligned with sort of the realities of barriers facing today's students. These are the things that I want to keep coming back to and developing my own personal consciousness around, and also supporting and creating space, particularly for other white folks to be owning the work of doing this. But this is, of course, everybody's work. So equity consciousness, ever expanding awareness of how the origins of inequities, how inequity operates in explicit and implicit ways in our institutions that were in fact structured to sort students, even access-oriented institutions, and the willingness to actually be authentically engaged in that work. So equity consciousness isn't just about personal reflection and growth. It's about a commitment to work. It's about a willingness and a commitment to work. And that is ongoing work for everybody. This is not a flip of a switch. It is the work of becoming, right? And was one of the things I loved about the mindfulness video. It's like, what are the intentions I set to become more the person I want to be in the world, right? Intersectionality, and I include it here because I know you all know about intersectionality, but I am continuously faced in states with institutions with this desire to well, can't we talk about socioeconomic status instead of race? Let's focus on income. And while that is legitimate and anchoring in who your students are is really important, the interconnected nature of identities needs to be acknowledged and included in how you think about and approach your work. But too often that focus on, or the desire to focus on, socioeconomic status rather than equity gaps in opportunities and outcomes along race lines is race avoidant and is about, sort of making race invisible, right? Or batting away conversations about that. And as part of the ongoing journey that I am on, I am increasingly aware of the fact that race avoidant approaches that I observe and that have historically participated in function to dismiss the lived experiences of people of color. And it actually serves as a device to disengage. And it sometimes shows up in really well-meaning ways because socioeconomic status is relevant and other identity categories are relevant and these things are important. But there's a very fine line, and we're amazing in this society at batting away and deflecting the kinds of conversations that we are not ready to own and have about how power and privilege operate in our systems and structures. And so So I wanted to just share these with you because as you think about the broader goals of your work and the communities in which you're operating and your colleagues and their starting points on these things, think about the gaps maybe that exist between these ideas and where others are, where you are, and I just want to encourage reflection on these things as part of the conversation. So I want to stop. Jenny, I did include another set of tools here on conducting risk mitigation strategy exercises as a facilitator. Do you want me to do that stuff or do you want me to stop here?
Well, I think let's pause and see if there's any kind of conversation on these equity questions, because I think they're really, this is some deep stuff and some deep thought. And then, I think we're going to have the slides and can look over the tools. If people don't have anything to say, then we can move on and kind of cover those quickly. But otherwise, let's pause first and see if anybody has any thoughts. Also, this is an awesome lead in to our conversation about the Level Up campaign, which will follow this. I can start. I'll say when I was previewing these slides yesterday with Allison, the race avoidance piece really resonated with me. I like Allison mentioned, I've participated in many conversations with colleges, with the college that I used to work with college, in this work now, where, that people say, well, that's not, it's not really the issue. Race isn't really the issue. And, can't we tackle this equity question from another angle by using socioeconomic status as a proxy? And I see, as that percolates into my own consciousness, it's like, well, why would you use a proxy? That would imply that people of higher socioeconomic status are all the same, and people of lower socioeconomic status are all the same, and that your race makes no difference in those experiences. And clearly that's not true. So, and Erica has her hand up.
I was just going to add from your previous conversation, Allison, about like the aim. Jenny and Katie and I did some training, and one of the techniques that they showed us is obviously talking about what your aim is, but what you're not trying to do as well. So identifying for people, because what happens, I'm sure you've all experienced I know we're talking about that problem, but I'd like to talk about this problem. And they trained us how to address that at the beginning. And I think related to, as Jenny was describing, the race avoidance, it's a good strategy to acknowledge that at the beginning of the conversation, that what we're not talking about, like, even though, so kind of doing the opposite of what you're describing of socioeconomic matters, but what we're talking about today is race. And I think that was a really helpful strategy for us to help groups of people that we convene a lot stay focused on what we really want to talk about.
And it also goes back to what Sam put in the chat earlier about the need to think about the bigger picture. We do, and it frustrates me, my colleagues know this, it frustrates me when some of our colleges use that SES proxy or try to say they aren't racially diverse enough to pursue racial justice because it doesn't fit their context. And I'm like, then you're not looking at the global context here, because that is what we all should be seeking. And I do understand the need to work locally and have appropriate context, local context for forward movement, but it burns my heart sometimes when some of these esteemed leaders will say with a straight face that, yeah, racial justice is not an issue for us. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, where do you live? What country? What planet?
Right. Yeah. It's really, I mean, it should also be said that how these issues are engaged, the risks, the personal risk, the professional risks, the threats that come with raising these issues are very different for me than they are for colleagues of color in the field. And that also needs to be recognized. And so I really want to kind of put the onus on white people to, do the work. And by that, I mean, anybody who is recognized by our country and treated by our institutions as white needs to own this work, because it is not work that can get done unless that happens. And so the risks and the threats that come with leading this work from different positions with respect to hierarchies of privilege and subordinate, they're very different for different folks. And I don't want to universalize, my experience. I just want to emphasize how important it is for white people to take this on and to support colleagues in taking it on. So I think I want to make sure, feel free anybody to dive in here. I do want to just show you this very quickly so that you can use it if you want it. I was told yesterday, because I used a version of this in another setting, that maybe COVID times makes it so that we should not call it something so morbid as a pre-mortem exercise. But I will tell you that I'm not persuaded by that argument, because even before COVID, I was getting pushback. I remember being in Oregon where it was just a lovely, everybody's so nice, all the niceness with each other in the room. And they were like, well, this just feels so negative. Can we call it something more positive? And it was like, no, this isn't, you can't actually, this is about being negative. This is about creating space for people to have really rough conversations about the worst things without feeling like they're not team players, essentially, right? So it's an exercise in perspective hindsight. I left this example in here from yesterday of the group I was with yesterday. Their focus was specifically on increasing attainment for adults of color in traditional, public higher community college settings. But you could say, okay, we want to scale co-rec implementation. We want to scale, whatever associated with pathways, whatever the thing is. And if you are working with a college, whatever their thing is, right? So the first step is what is the thing that you're trying to accomplish? What is the big picture? This is a great, Sam, big picture conversation. What is your overarching goal? And now imagine 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, whatever is the appropriate horizon. You look into the crystal ball and it tells you that you have failed, an unmitigated fail, not a partial fail, but a full fail. What are the reasons for that? So in a small group, this exercise, if you're in person, if we ever are such that, again, is about 15 minutes. You can do it, I would say online, more like 30 for a group. Everybody takes 5 minutes to write a list of here are all the ways that this could fail. And then you do a kind of round robin. Everybody lists, and then you cull into a list where you eliminate all the duplicates, you sharpen the language on the ones where there was overlap, and then you sort between the things that you are completely outside of your control, like COVID, like state policy, like funding, right, the things that are just, you can't influence, and you focus only on the things that you can influence. Invariably, that list of things is usually about 5 or 6 things, 5, 6, 7, and they are a mix of technical things that relate to the skill, capacity, and ability to actually do the stuff. Some of it is technological, some of it is, but a lot of them are adaptive. They're about human beings working together, aligning priorities, and maintaining focus over time together, or being derailed by the incredible power that defenders of the status quo have to perpetuate even the most indefensible status quo is amazing in higher ed in our country. And so so a lot of those threats are things about the tremendously powerful, insidious nature of the status quo's ability to perpetuate itself. And, but you really get to break that down a little bit and turn it into actual statement of risk, right? What are the risks for our project? So if you want to give it a more positive approach, you could call it a risk mitigation exercise. And then you ask people to imagine unmitigated failure, and you don't have to use the term pre-mortem. But essentially, you want to be asking yourselves, okay, we did this exercise, we've narrowed it down to the things that are in our control. What does it mean? How would we describe those things clearly? How will they derail us? What are the mitigation strategies that we can adopt now? What are the implications in terms of communication or will building that we need to get to right now? and what's the status? So you return to the risk register over and over again, and it evolves over time, and you use it to kind of help track your progress. The thing that's important here that I didn't, and I'll stop sharing, that is important to note is that this actually is an evidence-based approach. So research has shown that exercises in prospective hindsight, where you imagine a future and then you plan against that imagined future, makes teams like 30% more likely to identify derailers before that they might otherwise miss, or to plan for and mitigate against stuff that otherwise, sort of befalls teams. And so there's actually, and I'm a qualitative person, although I'm an evidence person, but when I was reading the research on what prospective hindsight does for teams, I was totally persuaded by the quant numbers on this, that the giving your brain and other people as a facilitator of conversations, that kind of space, can really help people navigate uncertainty and risk in projects that they're working on. So I wanted to share that, and now I am done, and it's exactly 11:30. Woo! More small wins for Cadillac, everybody.
Yay. Thank you, Allison. This was amazing. There is so much food for thought in here. It's, we could use this to build an additional, 3 more in-depth workshops, which maybe we'll do. But I am excited to have this overview, to have this food for thought. It's a great lead into our next conversation, which Katie and Precious are going to be leading about the Level Up digital dialogue. But I'm going to suggest, just selfishly, that we take a 2 to 5 minute bio break, grabbing coffee, doing the other necessaries. And if you're planning to join us to talk about Level Up, please come back at 11:35. So that's a 4-minute break. Let's go.